let me know when you guys are ready. Okay. Wesley, can you turn your camera on, please? God, you're like a kid.
All right, I'm good to go.
Cool. Okay. So Sandy and Wesley, Mrs. Darrell and Coach Etienne, thank you so much for your time and for agreeing to come into class with us, because the kids are really excited to hear what you have to say. So to give you guys some background, you're here for two reasons. You're my designated experts, one in being bilingual and how you feel like, or trilingual as it were for Sandy. And if you feel like you notice your personality changing when you're in different languages, and if so, do you feel like it's because the language structure itself kind of lends itself more to a certain, in a certain direction, or do you feel like maybe it's like the people you're communicating with in those particular languages, or perhaps you really just pick and choose whichever one you want to go through? So I guess maybe your experiences with language, if you grew up remembering like learning both at the same time, or if you feel like one, like I've had students in the past who are completely bilingual, but have said like, if they have to do an interview or like a Zoom interview, even though they have that equal, they would prefer one language over another in terms of like when they feel like they're in a corner, if there's one that is like more of a comfort level than another. And then specifically with Creole, I'm having you guys in to basically talk about, it's the biggest Creole language we're learning about and how it compares to French, how it differs from French. If you guys feel like you could easily listen in on a conversation in French and feel comfortable, or, I mean, it got its own language for a reason though, like where it differs. And then anything else you're looking into, if there's anything you say that I think of, but otherwise, I'd like to, you guys just have the floor.
That's a lot of information. All I could say is that I grew up, well, I was born in Montreal, Canada. My parents are the ones who were born in Haiti. They taught me French initially and also Creole. Creole is something that I heard all the time, so I'm very comfortable with Creole as opposed to French, even though French was my first language. French is not something that I was taught in school since I grew up in the United States, so I just learned English mostly. And my parents, because they speak Creole to each other all the time, every single day, that's all I heard, and I'm very comfortable. It is true that there are times that the language is different for me, even though I am very comfortable with English. There are certain things because you grow up in a household where French is really the main, or Creole really is the main spoken language between your parents. Even when they talk to you with the Creole, you know, and so even if they're speaking in English, it's broken English. It's this Creole mixed with the English. So, you know, for the longest while, for example, I didn't know that okra was okra. Like I just was like, kalalu, that's all I knew. And so when I heard okra for the first time, it was, and that was as an adult, you know, it was just surprising to me because I never really understood that for a while.
In your defense, I feel like I didn't hear about okra till I moved to the South. But okay, so sorry to clarify. So your parents are Haitian and you know Haiti from speaking with them at home. You were born in Canada, so that's where the French component is from, but you went to school in the US, so that's where, and then you were just able to maintain that French just from the Creole, or did you keep up with it some other way?
I maintained it because half of my family still live.
Oh, okay.
And my parents, that's what they speak at home, between French and Creole. Mainly Creole, but yes, French was still maintained.
Got it. So and yeah, Wesley, go ahead.
I'd like to piggyback off of the okra, and I didn't learn that till I want to say about 8 years ago. I was speaking to one of my Jamaican friends.
Does okra mean something else in Creole? What's the significance of okra?
Kalalu is what we know, but what I realized with Jamaicans, there's a
dish
kalalu. So when they were saying kalalu, I'm thinking about talking about okra.
Right.
And they were like, no. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. So I learned that, but you know, that's a little bit interesting. So I also learned that as an adult.
Right.
But for me growing up in Brooklyn, New York, I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My parents are from Haiti, so somewhat similar to you, Sandy.
I grew up in Brooklyn also.
Okay, so yeah, so, and I spoke English and Creole. Predominantly Creole just because my grandmother was from Haiti, so they will raise us while my parents were working. So grandma could only speak Creole. So that's the only way I also had to learn how to speak Creole while going to school speaking English in a trilingual school in Kids 189, where it was Spanish, English, and Creole. So a little bit of everything, but I can say as an adult, I still, if I'm speaking Creole, I'll mix in some English words into it, or if I'm speaking English, I will mix in some Creole. And then of course, like my wife will notice and she'd be like, dude, do you realize what you just said? And everybody else would be looking at me like I'm an alien. Yeah, so that mindset of acclimating as a Haitian American and being true to the culture and at the same time adapting to the American culture with languages can be a little bit confusing.
Yes.
In what ways? I totally agree. I'm just curious,
Yeah.
like for you
Well, I would say
personally.
this, For a long time, I remember when I moved to Florida after I left New York, and I have some of my Caucasian friends over my house, and if I said, "Hey, can you please close the light before you leave?"
Yeah.
It was like, "Close the light? How do you close the light?" In Creole, it's fermé.
Yeah.
Fermé, yeah. So that's close the light. So, but in English, it's not closed, it's turned off. So, I would do that, so that was really.
I've heard that's the hardest ones, the prepositions, because they never make sense. And it's not like it's just a memorization thing. And it doesn't, neither of them make more sense than the other ones. So I guess something cool about Creole then, generally, just to focus specifically on that part. Generally, when colonizers come to countries, the countries completely absorb the language, right? That's what we've seen, and in varying ways. But like, I know Mexican Spanish is different than Spanish, but it is Spanish. And Cuban Spanish is different than Mexican and Spanish, but it's Spanish, and it's pretty bad. I think that Haiti is this tiny island part of Hispaniola, and it didn't completely just absorb French. It kept so much of its own language and its own of its own identity that you don't really see a lot. There's not a lot of Creoles in the world. So I was just, again, curious about when you're learning about French in school, if that's something that's addressed, how much you guys want to maintain your identity, or if it's kind of glossed over, or again, I guess still, how similar is it to French, and why is it, what is the main difference that would make it not just be like a dialect of French? Like, in Spanish, you could get European Spanish versus Latin American Spanish, but it's not even like Caribbean French, it's just completely considered its own language. So I guess what are like the main differences? Maybe Sandy, I don't know, Wesley, how much French you speak.
That's just a little bit.
Creole is, to me, is different.
Yeah, I mean, it must be, that's what I mean. It didn't become that language. It still maintained its own identity. So what is it that makes it that distinct?
African dialect in it too, and mix up also even some Spanish. And so you have a mix of languages in that, and that's why I think it's so different from French. Even though the Haitian kids, when they go to school, they're taught in French.
Yes.
That's the language that they're taught in.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Colonizer part.
Right, exactly. But the language is different, definitely different. A person who speaks French, like from Paris, they will not understand Creole. Yeah, they won't understand.
They'll look down upon us, or even Canada.
Mhm.
Canada's French is, a little
Yeah.
bit different.
It's a little bit different.
But it's interesting how you say they would look down on you, because I totally agree. And like Spain often looks down at, like, I remember hanging out with my friend, I've been living in Colombia for 2 years, and they're like, they sound, you sound Latina now. And then, they feel like their Spanish is the best. But I feel like the cool part about Haiti is you guys could just be like, we don't claim to be French. Like, that's not our language. We have its own, like, I'm not speaking a broken version of yours. Like, Creole is its own language completely.
I would, that's the way I think, that we don't claim it, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Darrell, is that some of our older generation, if you don't speak French, you're not hating on anything.
Mhm. That's true.
You know, you're not part of the quote, quote, elite,
Elite, yeah,
you know, so,
you're
and
not
that's,
educated.
yeah, you're not educated, so
Right.
that's also a colonizer, mindset of
Right,
the only way we can be accepted is if you speak French.
French.
So, or, and at the same time, you know, if your Creole's not hitting on much, and you try to speak
That's
Creole, we will rip you up a new one.
Yeah.
I've been ripped up many a time.
Yeah.
You're like, dude, what are you saying? You're killing it.
Right.
I'm not killing it in a good way.
That is so true.
Well, Wesley, you're saying like, what is the university that offers Creole as a language now, right?
Yeah, I remember in 1995, when I graduated from high school, I was in school in Alabama State University. My friend, she was at University of Florida, and back in 1995, that was a language offered at the University of Florida, and I was shocked just because I knew the clientele of University of Florida, perception, and everything. But I was like, wow, I would expect like University of Miami, Florida Atlantic to be able to be teaching that, but I'm not saying they weren't, but I just was shocked that in Gainesville, Florida, that was a class that was taught. And so when I would meet up with her over the breaks and everything, and she was like, yo, our class, we have a part that we're doing. I'm like, what? And I was like, what? But I was like, wow. I mean, you know, as a young Haitian American, I'm like, wow, we are moving up in ranks more than, you know,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
than society would want us to.
Yeah, and then, it's funny you mentioned that, because I didn't know that they were teaching that there, but I know that, my parents lived in Miami, so we kind of have similar paths, but, they lived in Miami, and I remember going to visit a lot of times, and then there were books being published in Creole. I remember when it started, that whole thing, because before it wasn't a written language, it was just spoken, but then it's something that's becoming written and being even published and sold in stores.
Right, and so what's crazy about that is, like you said, it's being published sold in stores, but us going to church, we had to shut in spirit, I said it wrong. The choir book. Sunday spirit. Yeah. Yeah. Or the Bible, Biblia. You know, it was all in French.
Yeah.
And then in the choir book, it was French and Creole. Yeah. So I remember like there would be a part of the section where they would say we would sing it in French, and then there'd be a part of it we would sing it in Creole. But they had it in churches like that, in Haitian speaking churches. Okay. But like you said, being published, it wasn't being pumped out like that.
Right, it wasn't. It really wasn't. Yeah, you're right.
Awesome. And then how would you think, actually, Wesley, you brought this one up with me. How then, because Annie, you said that Creole also has a lot of like African influences. That makes me think then of like the Baju in New Orleans and things. Do you feel like you guys can easily, how different, I guess, is New Orleans Creole than Haitian Creole?
I've tried to be able to listen to see if I can catch anything. I ain't called nothing.
Because of the accents or because of the vocabulary?
I truthfully, I don't know.
I don't know.
It's nowhere near what we know.
No.
That's interesting.
The closest I've actually heard someone speak close to us is an island, and I want to say it's either St. Croix. St. Croix. It's one of those islands. Yeah. Yeah. And they would speak very similar. There were certain words that we understood. Yeah. But that's
St. Vincent? No.
Or even Dominica.
Dominica has a little bit of it. Yeah. Now the crazy thing about it now, I've been to Curacao, and I ran into a whole bunch of Haitian.
Oh, what's that? The Papa. What are they called? What do they speak in Curacao? It's the same as Aruba, papamiento or something?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm me neither, but I know it's.
Look, it doesn't matter where you travel, you're gonna run into some Haitians.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so but it blew my mind going to different countries. Like my friend is currently in Rwanda, and he sent me a picture. He's like, yo, I met some more Haitians. I'm like, wow, well, we's all over the place.
I mean, think of all the ones you're finding here in the school.
Yeah, like, Michelle, and then, Mr. Lindsay.
Surprise, I'm Haitian. I am curious though about you said the Spanish influence that maybe the New Orleans doesn't have. Is that just because you guys are kind of surrounded by all these Spanish speaking places? Like, you know,
Well, we share the island.
right, with
the Republic.
DR. So how much of that is the result of DR? Right, and you said no though. I asked Wesley and he said you feel like you didn't get a lot of like overlap between.
I don't think so either, because they don't get along.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, they don't really integrate that much.
Yes, it's a little different. And the crazy thing about New Orleans, like you said it, like, you know, that whole, the Louisiana Purchase only happened because of Haitians helping out with that.
Really? I don't know that story. Could you say it?
I mean, I wouldn't say I know the story well, but it's part of history that's not pushed out.
But that's what I'd like to know. I mean, that's like kind of my thing, like stuff like that's, you know, things that people should hear about but don't hear about because it's like,
Chicago's another place that Haitians help.
okay.
And I want to even say Savannah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's a big museum area where they show tribute to, and so Savannah, New Orleans, and Chicago.
Awesome. I'll look into these. Quick, like logistical, not logistical, maybe grammatical question. I'm just curious. Like this just sounds cool. So one of my students, like 10 years ago, if I remember correctly, Rosalvin St. Jean or something, St. John. You guys could probably say it better. So he was a Haitian, and he was telling me that in Haiti, you guys don't conjugate verbs, you conjugate nouns. Is that true? So it's like there's a past tense of I, a future tense of I, but the verb all stays the same. Is that true? That like blew my mind when he said that. And I guess that would be different than French. I know for sure that French like conjugates verbs, but he was like the verb stays the same and there's like a past tense of I, present tense of I. Is that true? Like how would you say,
Yeah,
just say like I went to the store. Are you conjugating the I part or you?
Yeah, m'brale means I'm going. So m'te means past.
So it's not.
But is I changing or is go changing?
No, stays the same. Yeah.
What does that mean?
Means I.
Oh, okay, so you're conjugating the verb. Rosalvin is confused. Okay. Sorry, I think I told my class that. Fake news, sorry, it's been disproven.
Yeah.
Then what's the biggest difference you can see in French? The vocab? Like if the sentence structure is the same as French? Like like adjective after the noun or like where in English it's before?
You got me about to do some research.
Sorry. Surprise, you're in language class.
No, it's the same. Like where the adjective.
Correct.
After.
So it's just the words then and like the vocabulary that would be what sets like a French person to be confused. Awesome.
I have to.
Yeah, I can let you guys go. It's 2:40 is my thing. Let me stop recording.